Well, and thanks everybody. So I'm gonna get the recording going here. All right. So welcome to the 2025 New Mexico Federal Lands Access Program webinar for federal land management agencies. So just a quick intro from me. My name is Andrew Valdez, and I'm a planner with Fed Highways, but I did spend many years in federal land management, both with Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife. So I've been in your position before, and I'm here to help, be a resource for you guys. Have a few housekeeping items before we kind of hop in here. Just as I said, this meeting is being recorded and is going to be posted on the New Mexico FLAP webpage. Second, this webinar is really geared for you all on the FLMA side. We will be hosting a webinar tomorrow for prospective applicants. So these are the local government agencies that own and manage the access roads and facilities that people use to travel to the federal lands. And I just mentioned this because we want to see FLMAs and local governments collaborate on applications and try to find those projects that are mutually beneficial. And I'll kind of get into more of the mechanics of the application process later in the presentation. We've slotted a couple hours for today. I've only got about 30 slides to go through. So the presentation itself is probably going to take maybe about an hour. And then we've got plenty of time at the end for Q&A. Also, just to note, all application materials have been posted to the New Mexico FLAP webpage since about the beginning of the month. So those are all uploaded and ready for download by you guys and by the applicants. And finally, I did add this slide deck to the invite, and it will also be posted to the FLAP webpage. But if you got any trouble, just shoot me an email and I can get you a copy. So before we hop in, is everyone seeing my screen? It's a shot of Bandelier National Monument. Let's see that.
Yes. Yep, we can see it.
I see thumbs up. All right. Here we go. Okay. So here's a general outline for the day. This may be review for some of you, but as we heard, for others might be totally new information. So I'm going to cover federal lands, highways, and the FLAP program, basically A to Z. And we'll also cover the parts of the application packet that you all need to be familiar with as the FLMAs. And then, as I said, we'll close out with some Q&A, call timelines, some general housekeeping. And there are also some key points to look out for that you'll see with just the little yellow indicator there. All right, so federal lands, highways. We are basically the Department of Transportation for you all in the federal land management world. So as I'm sure many of you know and are aware, about a third of the United States is owned and managed by the federal government. And our office plans, designs, and builds transportation infrastructure within and leading to federal land units. And we've got different programs for each, which I'll get into in a minute. We do function much like a state DOT in that we deliver most of our projects, although we don't own or maintain any transportation assets. The rest of federal highways is under the federal aid system, where funding goes to the individual states, and then federal highways plays more of a stewardship and oversight role with the state DOTs and other local agencies. So for federal lands, highways, we sort of try to capture that in our mission statement there, building effective, efficient, and reliable networks of federal public roads and bridges to protect and enhance the nation's natural resources and provide needed transportation access for Native Americans, and providing financial resources and transportation engineering assistance for public roads that service the transportation needs of federal and Indian lands. So, org chart. Everyone loves a good org chart. This is where Central Federal Lands, which is my office, sits within broader US DOT. So we're a division office of Federal Lands Highways. And again, we serve the land management agencies. So for us, You all on the FLMA side are essentially our primary clients, and we exist to help you meet your land management objectives. And this map just shows the central federal land states. So our division office is in Lakewood, Colorado. This is where I sit. And our territory basically includes California to North Dakota to Texas and sort of everything in between, including New Mexico. These are our core capital programs. So today we're mostly going to be talking about the Federal Lands Access Program, or FLAP, and its complementary program, the Federal Lands Transportation Program, or FLTP, and how those projects are supposed to sort of work together. So these two programs were set up to address access to and within federal lands. And sort of ideally, we want these programs to sort of be symbiotic and support each other. And we'll get into that angle a little bit later. But the easiest way to think about this is FLTP is for federally owned transportation systems, and then FLAP is non-federally owned, but provides access to public federal lands. FLAP projects are programmed through a call for projects, which we opened for New Mexico on April 7th. And the owner of the facility or the agency that maintains the facility has to be the primary applicant. So typically this is like a state DOT or other local government agency like a county or a town. But the ownership must be non-federal, and they do have to coordinate with the FLMAs. And I'll talk about how that happens a little bit later. The FLTP is programmed by you guys, the FLMAs themselves. We don't have much involvement in that process. So if you don't know your transportation coordinator, typically these are folks at either the regional or national offices. Please reach out to me and I can connect you with the right folks so you know who to speak to about transportation projects on your units for federally owned systems. And we also have programs for U.S. federally recognized tribes and emergency federal relief. That's the TTP and the ERFO. We're not going to spend much time talking about those today. Okay, so just a little more about Central. We have those 14 Western states I showed you on the map, and some Pacific territories, including Hawaii. And, really not just about moving people from A to B. Our federal lands are some of the nation's treasures, and the built infrastructure needs to take into account things like visitor experience, resource conservation, view sheds, things like that. And we're really at the forefront of delivering context-sensitive projects like that. And we provide cradle-to-grave transportation services in that Fedlands context. So everything from planning to design, environmental, right-of-way, utilities, NEPA clearance, and project management, we do it all. And the applicants really only need to help us make sure our projects align with the needs on the ground. Okay, so moving on to the Access Program. This is a program that's authorized by Congress in national transportation legislation. So first in what was called MAP 21, Moving Ahead for Progress, MAP 21. This was back in 2012, and it's been continued through every transportation bill through the current one, which is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BILL. You may have also heard of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Same thing, just a different acronym. Bill authorized around $300 million a year for FLAP for year through from 2022 through 2026. And we expect and hope that Congress will reauthorize FLAP in the next Transportation Act. And its goals or purpose is to improve non-federal transportation facilities that provide access to, are adjacent to, or sometimes located within federal lands, with an emphasis on high-use recreation sites and federal economic generators, which I'll get into a little bit later. But really, this is about recreational access. So we'll start with kind of general eligibility. So per the legislation, any public highway road, bridge, trail or trailhead, or transit system located on or adjacent to federal lands is eligible. And improvements can include rehabilitation, restoration, new construction or reconstruction, engineering and environmental compliance, operations and maintenance of transit facilities, and planning and research. So that's all eligible. But title and or maintenance responsibility must be vested with a state, county, local government, or tribal government. So the non-federal facility owner will be the primary applicant, but that doesn't mean FLMA staff can't or shouldn't work with locals on an application, and we certainly encourage that. Can have scenarios where a local government agrees to assume the maintenance responsibility or sometimes outright ownership of a federal route. Those kinds of projects are eligible, and we really do like to see those, as it can relieve some challenges and burdens for the FLMAs. We all know that funds are limited, right? And there were some changes to the access program to FLAP under the bipartisan infrastructure law. There did used to be a match requirement, but now local match is optional. It can help, obviously, in certain situations, which I'll get to in a minute. And there's expanded eligibility for what are called context-sensitive solutions. So these are things that preserve scenic, aesthetic, historic, or environmental resources. So think of like a raised boardwalk over a wetland or an aquatic organism passage over a stream, for example. And there's also eligibility for signage, wayfinding, landscaping, and other visual mitigations. Typically, those elements by themselves wouldn't be very competitive in a flat project. We would want to see kind of the primary component of the project be something, a transportation improvement, but now they can be included in a larger project package. All right, so we're gonna talk through some kind of basic eligibility scenarios. So at the top there, we've got a road or trail that starts outside the federal lands and ends inside the federal land unit, assuming the blue segment is federally owned and the red part is locally owned and managed. That whole alignment with a maintenance agreement or easement where the local agency agrees to manage the blue segment of roadway that's within federal lands, that would be considered eligible. The second one down is kind of the most straightforward scenario where you've got a locally owned road that starts outside the federal lands and ends at like the federal lands boundary at like a trailhead or a parking lot or a fee station. If the trailhead or parking lot is locally owned and maintained, all of those facilities leading up to the access gateway could be eligible in an application. And then there at the bottom, you can have a road that starts outside the federal lands and ends short of the federal land boundary. We typically wouldn't want to see anything farther than about 10 miles away to be considered eligible. But if it leads to eventually or provides some access to federal lands, we would consider it eligible. Just the further away, you get from the Fedlands nexus or access portal, the less competitive it's likely to be. Few notes here: tribal roads maintained by a local tribe are eligible, but the facility must access some federal lands other than just the tribe. Tribal lands in and of themselves are not eligible for federal lands as the destination for this program. So for FLAP, tribal entities are kind of more treated like a DOT or a county more than an FLMA. And then finally, land leased by the federal government is not eligible, must be federally owned. This is another scenario that we might see sometimes, and it might be relevant in New Mexico. You could have a state park surrounding a reservoir that's managed by either the Army Corps of Engineers or the Bureau of Reclamation. Roads or even water facilities like docks or marinas leading to the water that are within the park that are not federally maintained are eligible. And that's an opportunity for leverage funds to be proposed in an application. If the state park is, say, already planning some transportation improvements to the site, the whole project could be bundled for either federal highways or the state park to deliver, and then FLAP just serves as sort of a supplemental funding source in that case. So that's eligibility. Moving on to FLAP funding. FLAP is allocated by a legislative formula, and this hasn't changed since MAP 21. And essentially, it's a function of the percentage of federal lands within a state and federal public roadway mileage by the state. So this is how funding shakes out on a national basis. Western states are favored in this program, and New Mexico is one of our bigger programs with about 34% land mass, and that gives you an annual allocation of about $8 million per year. Now, in the transportation world, that's not a lot of money, and of course, we wish we had more. But if we're talking things like unpaved roads and trails and natural surface trailheads, planning projects, and other leveraged opportunities with partners, that funding can start to go a little bit farther. And we will typically program anywhere from 2 to 4 years of funding in any one call. So we could be talking upwards of $30 million of projects programmed in this call. The bipartisan infrastructure law did remove the local match requirement, but this is what the local requirement used to be for matching funds. So in previous years, New Mexico applicants had to come up with a 14% local match. This does help lowering the barrier to entry for some less well-resourced local agencies, but of course this also puts pressure on limited program dollars. And there are instances where it does make sense for a local or state agency to want to partly or even mostly fund a project with federal aid or other local funds, and then just use FLAP as a supplementary funding source, and then use central federal lands to deliver the project. That's not uncommon, and of course helps us expand the program. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but generally, if you've got a roadway where somewhere around half of the daily traffic is accessing the federal lands and the rest of the usage is either a local traffic or through traffic, we would want to see commensurate local funding proposed in the project application. This is just a rundown of eligible leverage funding sources, mostly an FYI for you guys on the FLMA side. But as I mentioned earlier, FLTP funds can be used as leverage to deliver one larger project. So for example, if one of you is aware of an FLTP project, but the need extends beyond your park or forest boundaries, it would make sense to bundle those projects into one package for us to design and deliver. And there's significant savings when we can do projects like that. Here's a little more on the FLAP, FLTP leverage angle. As I said, these two programs can be bundled, and we like to see that. There are some conditions. The Programming Decisions Committee, or PDC, and FLMA concur on the project, and a little bit more on the PDC later. We want to see, of course, the projects be contiguous or at least adjacent to each other. And the project has to be managed as one delivery package so that we can realize those economies of scale. And the PDC may also require the applying agency, the local agency, to contribute some funding, but this is more figured out sort of on a case-by-case basis. And here's just a graphic example of what this might look like, a joint FLTP, FLAP project. So say you've got a $1 million flap job to improve a county road, to the entrance of a national forest. So it's that blue segment there. And then separately, there's an FLTP project to improve, the scenic drive to this, to a parking area, that red segment there. Those could be combined in a FLAP application. And, this has benefits to all the parties. The applicant has a low or no cost burden, and then they can have us design and deliver the project. They get to claim an overmatch of leveraged funds on the application. And this is also great for us and the taxpayer because it'll be much cheaper to deliver one larger project than to mobilize for two smaller projects separated by a period of years. So, my ask to you FLMA folks on the call is get with your area regional transportation program managers to see if there are any possibilities like this in the pipeline for your units. And again, if you don't know who to talk to, reach out to me, let me know, and I can get you connected. Okay, so moving on to project delivery. This is kind of another just FYI for you guys, but as I mentioned, Central Federal Lands typically leads and delivers the selected projects, and the applicant will indicate this on the application itself. That's because this is our business model. We are project funded, and we do have performance metrics that we meet every year. There are some exceptions to this, like major highway reconstruction or transit projects, but they are pretty rare. And again, this is mainly just FYI. The takeaway here is that just, we typically deliver the program as opposed to a state DOT or other local agency. So for us and you guys, it's a federal to federal relationship. All right, so who makes the programming decisions? So each state has a programming decisions committee or PDC. This is a 3-person volunteer board that's established by a charter and made up of a state DOT rep and a local government rep, and then our office, Fed Highways, has 1 seat. So you can see the PDC responsibilities there, but essentially it's their task to ensure stewardship of the program from a statewide perspective. It's not their job to, advocate for special projects in their districts or anything like that. Now, what you don't see here is FLMA representation on the PDC. Each state has an FLMA technical advisory group or TAG. These are typically FLMA reps from the regional or national levels, and they advise the PDC, but they don't have a vote when it comes to shortlisting projects and making programming decisions. So, transportation funding under FLAP is a fixed amount per state. And as much as we, like to do all the projects, of course we can't, and we don't want to deadlock the PDCs. So for the access program, we defer to the agencies that own and maintain the facilities to make these final decisions. So all that being said, feedback from the tags is hugely important. So, FLMAs do play a crucial role in programming and decision making. Moving on to preferred projects. So preference is given to transportation facilities providing access to high-use recreation sites and federal economic generators. So that's actually written into the legislation. So federal recreation is defined as any site used by the public to recreate on federal lands, pretty straightforward. High use is defined by a region or a local area and not compared across the state or the entire country. So like, not every county is going to have the Grand Canyon, for example, right? And then federal economic generators are defined as any use of or on federal lands that increases aggregate investment or economic activity for a local community and or region. So things like ski areas, in some limited cases, energy production, sites that have like a regional or national draw, major employment centers, things like that. But the underlying ownership does have to be federal. And these are the kind of projects that we like to see, strong applications, strong projects, starting with full reconstruction or rehabilitation of a roadway. Anything that expands modal access to a federal unit, so like a new bike lane or a new multi-use path. Wholesale bridge replacements, safety enhancements, things like access portals, trailheads, parking lot improvements. Those are also good projects because they typically serve to expand or enhance access. Some of this is obviously a judgment call, but if the PDC sees a reasonable scope, realistic project estimate, and good FLMA coordination and support, that'll generally mean the project meets the FLAP vision, and that'll be a pretty strong project. We also love to see partnerships. So partnerships really are what make good projects excellent. When we see multiple agencies come together, work on an application, this can help leverage funds or local knowledge and addresses projects of mutual interest and greatest need. Many complex projects require a coalition of local champions to get them moving and funded. So the more partners at the table, generally the more resilient the project is going to be. And just to keep in mind, really our goal is to service our partners and deliver quality projects that the public and public agencies want. We don't really have an agenda here. We're kind of a neutral third party. So weak applications, typically we don't like to do maintenance only projects. The purpose of the program is to expand access, not patch up something that has some underlying major flaws or address a county's deferred maintenance backlog. We also want to do complete projects. We wouldn't want to do a project where an underlying issue or problem isn't addressed. So say if a road has an outdated design or poor subgrade, and those elements aren't addressed in the application, I think that would weaken the overall project. Obviously, unclear or poorly written applications don't fare well. So if you on the land management side are working with a county on an application, it helps to provide them with, photos, maps, whatever context they need to be able to clearly communicate the purpose and need for the project is always helpful. And then of course, we want the project to meet the basic eligibility criteria. And we always want to see good coordination with the FLMAs. Believe it or not, we sometimes get applications where there was no coordination done with the FLMAs. So sometimes we also see applications that seem more like urban or rural commuter routes or neighborhood streets. And the federal lands access component is sort of like a minority of the usage. Projects like those can be eligible, but in cases like those, I think we would always want to see commiserate matching funds since the Fed access component is secondary to another secondary purpose. Okay, so application and application process. So the links you see at the top of the slide there will take you to the main FLAP landing page and to the New Mexico page. And there you'll see a map of the US and other info about the access program. As you can see, New Mexico is currently green, which means the process is open and we're accepting applications. Generally, a call for projects is open anywhere from 70 to 90 days. And we try to schedule calls every 3 to 4 years, depending on funding availability, our resource availability, and the other projects that we're doing in the state. And the reason we do it that way instead of a yearly call is because we don't want the size of a state's allocation to drive our funding and programming decisions. We'd rather develop a quality multi-year program, and we don't want to constrain ourselves to an artificial yearly number. So that's why we do it that way. And this is where we would be going into the application process page by page. But since you will only be filling out the FLMA support forms, that's really all we're going to cover here. So this is what it looks like. This is the FLMA support form. Also on the New Mexico FLAP webpage, and it's just one page. So not too onerous for you guys. There's a couple of things I want to point out. If the project impacts more than one land management agency, we would typically want each agency to submit a form. So, lots of times national parks are embedded into forest or BLM lands. We'd want to see both agencies, both both reps filling out a separate form. Box 11 is important. This is where the PDC will see how the applicants coordinated with you all in developing the scope of the project. You know, is this a bridge to nowhere or a local need that's not really important to the land managers? Or is this something that really helps out the unit? And this is your opportunity to kind of sell the project from your perspective. Also, box 12 is to indicate if FLTP funds will be used anywhere near the proposed FLAP project. So again, reminder to talk to your regional transportation coordinators to see if there's any of those projects in the pipeline. We also encourage letters of support. So if local or regional friends groups want to submit a letter, all the better. Those can be submitted along with the application package. And again, you know, we want to see collaboration on an application, but the only responsibility for you guys on the FLMA side is to fill out this form, fill out and sign this form. Quick rundown on the selection process. So as I mentioned, we shoot for a call every 2 to 4 years, and then we'll typically go to a project shortlist. There are a handful of projects that look pretty strong, but some close calls need to be made or further scoping needs to be done. And then a Central Federal Lands-led project team will conduct any preliminary engineering and identify any major project risks or contingencies. This typically involves some site visits, so we do try to schedule these in the warmer months when there isn't a chance of snow on the ground. It's also helpful if we can have FLMA staff for these scoping meetings, since you guys know the territory. And then next, the PDC will deliberate and determine the final program with input from the FLMA tags. And then CFL will deliver the project cradle to grave. And again, this is everything from environmental clearance all the way to closeout. And once a project is awarded, there's a single point of contact in the project manager in our office. So nobody has to navigate, you know, a complex federal bureaucracy to get information. And here is our New Mexico timeline. So we'll have the call for projects open for about 70 days, as I said, from April 7th to June 20th. We're targeting to have our deliberative process complete by late summer of this year, so we can have a shortlist meeting sometime in the August, September timeframe. And then we give ourselves kind of a generous amount of time to complete that preliminary scoping. Again, just because we'll have to work around some winter weather likely in New Mexico. But at the very latest, we can expect to have a scoping on shortlist projects complete by spring, maybe as late as summer of 2026. That would put a final programming meeting sometime in June of 26. And this would give us construction of the selected projects sometime in the 28-29 timeframe. But a lot of this can kind of shift around and be project dependent. So this isn't like set in stone. And finally, just to wrap up, a last few items here. Really all you need to know here is that we do have obligation targets of 95% of flat funds on a yearly basis. We do want to get these dollars out the door and on the ground. Within the term of a transportation bill, we can loan and borrow between states. So, you know, don't be shy about asking for larger dollar amounts. If it's a great project, we will try to figure out a way to fund it. I will be your FLAP point of contact for this call up and through the short list of projects. So feel free to reach out to me at any time throughout the process. And you can see the programming contacts there. So these are who will take over from me after a short list of projects is agreed upon. So for Central, that's Jill. And her contact info and my contact info is on the last slide. And as I said, this whole presentation is available on the meeting invite and will be available on the New Mexico FLAP webpage. So, in closing, I would say, if you're aware of a need or a good project at your unit or at your forest or at your park, it might be incumbent on you to do some of the legwork and outreach to the locals. What we've seen is that a state DOT or even counties and stuff may not have good visibility into access needs for federal lands. A lot of times they're kind of worried about the high volume paved networks and getting people to and from work and to and from school and things like that. And the recreational access network isn't always top priority for them. So if you know of a good project, get on the phone, talk to, folks in the county public works department or the roads department, say, hey, there's a funding opportunity here. Are you interested in submitting a project? And a lot of projects come to us with the FLMAs kind of taking the lead here. So that's really it for my presentation. And thank you all for your time. And like I said, I'm happy to hang on for as long as you guys want. I know that was probably a lot of information. Yeah, available to answer questions now or later. So thanks. Looks like Jim's got his hand up. Jim, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. Am I understanding it correct that the request has to come from the county or the state? It can't come from us?
So it can come from you, but the primary applicant has to be the facility owner. So you've got a county road that leads into a national forest or something like that. The primary applicant in that case would be the county, and you would support it with that FLMA support form. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't develop the application sort of in collaboration. But we want to make sure that the facility owner is on board with the project because that's where the funding is going to be, and they are the ones responsible for upkeep and maintenance of the facility. Does that make sense?
Just to rephrase it a little though, Andrew, because it could be like a Forest Service owned road as long as the local agency maintains it. So it does have to be a local government agency, and it could be owned or maintained by them. So we do have some cases where it's like a forest highway, but the county maintains it, or or vice versa. So
is there a way to find out who has that jurisdiction or ownership of roads?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to hop on a call with you after this, and we can kind of pull up Google Earth and walk through it. We maintain an inventory of FLTP routes, and we also have a pretty good hand. Yeah, for sure. So we can talk through the specifics of your need kind of ad hoc.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks.
For sure. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
I'll just add, Andrew, like that this is the program designed to improve access to federal land. So we do put a lot of weight into the FLMA's opinions and preferences. And so if there is a project that you think like, oh, that road would be it'd be great to get some money to improve that, be, the catalyst and reach out to the local agencies and try to support them through the application process and see if you can get these jobs in, and then, support the letters of support. Even, it's great to have it at a unit level, but also talk to the regional managers and regional staff to get, even higher level of support, just to show why it's a priority across the state too. So you know, we do put a lot of weight in those recommendations and those opinions, so it's worth getting involved.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. Kind of related to that, a lot of it will come down to, you know, how much recreation is happening at these sites. And again, it's not, you know, it's not an absolute number. If you've got a rural county and there's the most popular forest trailhead is just getting, you know, a lot of usage for the area. If you can provide, as the FLMA, counts with actual counter data or even anecdotal data, that'll help us in kind of scoring these projects in our deliberations. So it really is kind of a partnership between the FLMAs and the locals putting these things together. Anybody else? Can't remember the last time I only had one question.
Andrew, I just want to say this is really helpful. I don't know that I've really gotten my head around it in a comprehensive snapshot like this before, so thank you.
Oh, good. Glad to hear it. Well, yeah, thanks again, everybody. Again, you know, all this information will be available on various channels, and yeah, happy to talk through kind of the specifics of any of, you know, projects you guys might have in mind. And yeah, we're all looking forward to some good projects in New Mexico in the coming months here. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good one.
Just stay on, Andrew.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I could let me stop the recording here.